Hi, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about a piece called Great Scott, essentially a caricature of Christopher Lloyd, Doc Brown, from Back to the Future. So, the Back to the Future trilogy was something of a real kind of milestone in my childhood anyway. I absolutely loved it. It came out in the mid-'80s, and again, it was a trilogy that just absolutely captured my imagination and really kind of spoke to this fascination I've always kind of had with time travel, at least in a fictional sense. Doc Brown was a really just amazing character, pure comedy, pure outrageousness, a kind of a caricature of a character, if you almost want to think of it that way. And the funny thing about it is that I haven't really posted a video in about a week or so, mostly because I really wanted to spend some time really developing this particular piece. I had an idea in mind. It was a very strong, solid picture. I had a couple ideas as to how I wanted to compose it, but I had a really solid idea of what I wanted it to look like in the end, in terms of the likeness and everything like that. And you can kind of see I'm kind of working on getting that likeness down right now in these like little rough sketches that I'm doing here. The thing about it is, and I didn't really realize I was doing this at the time, but going back and kind of looking through the video and kind of reviewing some of the sketching that I kind of did really early on, I realized here that I was actually kind of doing something of an amalgamation when I was doing this caricature. I am certainly trying to do something that looks like Doc Brown from Back to the Future, but if you see here, I ended up settling on a composition with his hand kind of running through his hair. And in kind of doing some of the research for this, I pulled up a whole bunch of photos through Google, but I also went back and watched all three of the Back to the Future movies again. And at no point whatsoever does Doc Brown ever really say Great Scott and run his hand through his hair like that. So again, this is a really solid picture in my head. I knew this was a pose that I wanted. I knew it was kind of almost emblematic or iconic of the characters. So why wasn't I seeing it in the movies, at least not over and over and over and over and over again? Well, I kind of let it go, decided it was a good, decent enough pose. It was well composed on the page, and along with the clock tower that kind of goes in the background a little bit later on, I've got something on a paper that at least kind of makes some compositional sense, so I just kind of went with it. But later on, as I'm kind of reviewing some of the footage here, it occurred to me that the hand through the hair thing was not a Doc Brown thing. It was a Christopher Lloyd thing when he played a character called Jim on a TV show, Taxi. The character Jim constantly ran his hand through his hair whenever he was dumbfounded or misunderstood something. And I guess I kind of, considering this is the same actor playing both roles, kind of mix the two together to get the caricature you see right here. Again, ultimately, I kind of think it works. It really kind of seems like something Doc Brown might do, or at the very least Christopher Lloyd might do, as one of his little mannerisms. And I kind of kept it in there. I like the composition on it, and so there you go. You may have noticed, though, in the sketch, though, I really kind of struggled with getting the arm drawn in there right. And generally speaking, I don't usually struggle with that, but what we get back to is this idea that we're doing exaggeration. So how much do you exaggerate? How much do you leave alone? It's kind of a delicate balance here. And when you're doing things like this concept of caricature where you know that something's going to be a little bit outrageous, the idea is to kind of achieve or strive for some sense of balance. Now, means of example here, you may notice that the mouth and the jaw is the part we're really exaggerated here on Doc Brown. His mouth obviously doesn't really open that wide. His jaw doesn't drop that low, and it's certainly not that squared off and solid as it kind of is in the picture here. But in order to balance that, you got to kind of shrink something else. If you're going to grow something big, if you're going to enlarge something, something else is going to kind of compensate for it to strike that sense of balance. And so what we do is we kind of shrink the cranium there a little bit, kind of take the top of the head, make it a little bit smaller, so it balances out the enlarged lower half of the face there. I think I was trying to do something similar with the arm. Maybe, let's get this really elongated arm. It'll kind of match the face, but ultimately it just didn't work, and I had to kind of redraw it a couple times to get it at least in some sense of proportion. Again, I spent a long time on this. I really wanted to really kind of nail down exactly how I wanted this to look in a lot of ways, and I had really early ideas from the beginning as to how I wanted to color it too. So you'll see here that I've already kind of laid in some pencil type areas of shadow, because what I wanted to really kind of do here is have some sort of a light that was kind of coming on the front of his face, and that light source was going to be something of a warm light source. My idea in my head is that it was going to be off frame, you weren't going to be able to see it, you had no real idea that it existed, but the idea was that the flames from the DeLorean as it kind of jumps through time and leaves that trail of flames behind it, that's what you're seeing on his face. That's lighting up the front of his face. So a lot of shadow is going to be in some kind of odd areas on the planes of the face where that fire wouldn't necessarily illuminate him head on. That's going to be one light source, though. There's actually going to be a secondary light source, and the secondary light source is the environment itself, or the sky. This is going to be during that lightning storm that kind of was really the main subject matter of the first movie. And so there's going to be a lightning bolt kind of ripping through the sky in the upper right-hand corner, and that's also going to illuminate him, but more kind of from behind almost. Not behind him, but just on the other side of his face that we can't see from the camera angle that we're at. So again, a little bit of a cool light source there, a warm light source, and then of course shadows to try to hopefully complement that and get everything to balance out. Again, I spent a little bit more time than I usually do on the line drawing here, mostly because of that solid idea that I wanted to kind of really kind of get intact before I moved on to colors. Generally, that's my motif. I really do like strong line drawings before moving into the next stage, but with this one, I really kind of went for a lot of detail-oriented work that, you know, I may not have necessarily done in the past. For instance, hair is a good example of this. Sometimes I will just kind of draw the outline of hair and then kind of work it out during the painting stage later and kind of figure out how it works. This time, I wanted all the line work to really kind of represent where the strands fell and which areas of the hair clumped together, and etc. Now, a brief note there on some of the unusual colors that I used there. I painted his hair green for just a second. Mostly that was just to kind of block it in and make sure that I had some sort of a layer for just the hair and the hair only, so that way I could come back to it later when I wanted to do, you know, shadows and highlights and stuff like that, and be able to keep it separate from the rest. I sometimes work this way, sometimes I don't. The thing about this is that as I'm working through different methods of, you know, kind of rendering light and darkness, I'm kind of finding out that nobody really has the standard tried but true method of doing this the same way 100% of the time. There are several different methods I've kind of found out by doing some research. Through my own experimentation, I've kind of found out some of my own methods of doing things. There are some ways of doing things that really kind of become an industry standard because you are able to kind of do modifications later on. And that's kind of, you know, motivation behind doing some things like that. But for the most part, again, if you figure out a way to get something done and it looks good, by all means do it. And one of the things I try to kind of experiment with in this one, something I might use in the past, something I may use in the future, I haven't decided yet, but is this idea of applying some sort of a color filter to help your colors balance a little bit. So again, this gets back to lighting source again. I know that I have a light source that's going to be a warm, kind of a yellow-orange light source coming from the flames I want to kind of, show on the front of his face, so to speak. But behind him, there's also going to be that lightning bolt kind of illuminating him with a cool light as well from the sky. So, you know, when I'm trying to get all that in, how do I, you know, create contrast, separate foreground from background, etc. I want to apply some filters to this. So I want to discuss this in a little bit more detail in just a second, but just kind of take a note here. I'm starting to get the background painted in right now. So the clock tower goes in. I'm just kind of roughing something in here really quick so I have some shape. I got a rough kind of cloudy sky going in there and just some texture I threw in on the background. I don't necessarily want to have a lot of attention on this, so I'm not really going for a ton of detail, but you may notice it just happened right there. A blue screen was kind of added to the background, and now an orange screen is going on the foreground. And what I'm doing here is just taking that orange and I'm cutting it away from anything that I don't want under that orange filter. In this case, what I don't want under the orange filter is anything that's in the background. I only want the foreground having that orange coloring to it. Now this is way too, saturated. I'm going to, lower its opacity. I'm going to desaturate a little bit, once I kind of get all the areas cut out that I want. But what it's meant to do here is to give everything kind of a slight orange tinge, just like that, meant to kind of, represent that light source that I was mentioning before. And again, in the background, we did something similar, kind of a blue kind of wash over everything. Opacity was kind of lowered so that way it's not overwhelming, but you do get this sense that there is a light source in the sky that's blue. And again, the lightning bolt sits back there. You have some vague idea of the clock tower, but it is all sitting in background for a couple different reasons. Number one, things tend to kind of get more of a bluer hue to them as they fade into the background. I've certainly exaggerated it here, but it does exist. And there's also this idea that I have a contrast going on between the blue in the background and its opposite, orange, in the foreground. So the idea here, hopefully it works, is that when you look at this from afar, that Doc Brown figure really pops off the page, but you do get that sense that there is a sense of presence there. There is a background that kind of puts him in a time and in a place. that's really all there is to it. The idea here is, again, that I spent a lot of time trying to make sure that I kind of get this as fully realized as I possibly could. I can tend to get a little bit lazy with my art. I'll be the first to admit it, and certainly I did some laziness here with the background as well. But when it came to the figure itself, I really kind of spent a lot of time trying to get a good balance here, and I think that I mostly achieved it. But I also really kind of took the time to go in there and really hit the details too, like the individual strands of hair. I spent a lot of time on the eyeball and that little highlight on it that I'm pretty proud of, if I'm being honest, and really trying to kind of get some really nice, good depth of shadow without necessarily just taking everything black. I do tend to work very dark a lot, and I wanted to kind of lighten up a little bit, even though I was working in a kind of a dark environment this time. And again, I think it was largely successful. Now, mostly, why? Because of these contrast things I'm doing with the colors here. I'm not really doing dark colors. I'm just doing contrasting colors to kind of simulate more shadow than anything else. So that's about all we have for this particular piece here. I just want to take a moment to do my shameless plug and ask you to take a moment to subscribe, share, and please leave a comment if you have any questions or any suggestions for anything in the future. As always, thank you for watching the video. Take some time to stop back, and I'll have more content soon. Take care, and thank you.